I want to tell you about a word first. Not the accident. Not the note. A word. Busy. That's what my mother said when a nurse called her at 8:45 at night to tell her I was going into emergency surgery and might not survive it. Not on my way. Not which hospital. Just busy, followed by a pause with boutique music playing behind it, and then, her sister needs us more right now. I didn't hear her say it. I was already unconscious by then, a blood pressure that had stopped being a number and started being a warning, a spleen quietly emptying my blood supply into places it wasn't supposed to go. I only found out what she said 3 days later, from the one person who was standing at the nurse's station holding the phone. And when I finally understood what that one word had cost me, it wasn't the worst thing I learned that week. It wasn't even close. The worst thing was written on a sticky note I stuck to my best friend's refrigerator 8 weeks later, in my own handwriting, at 2 in the morning, with my ribs still healing under a fresh scar. 4 letters and a math symbol. O plus A, UB. That equation is the reason I'm telling you this story. Because busy broke my heart. But the blood type on that fridge broke my entire family, and it took me exactly as long to solve it as it takes most people to stop noticing the family that keeps forgetting them. My name is Casey. I'm a nurse. Bridget Regional, 12-hour shifts, the kind of job where you spend all day making sure strangers are cared for and somehow forget to check whether anyone's doing the same for you. I was 31 years old, and up until that spring, my life ran on a schedule that wasn't mine. I picked up my mom's blood pressure prescription on my way home because I was already out anyway. I filled her pill organizer every Sunday. I taped a color-coded medication calendar to my parents' fridge, the same fridge, it turns out, where I'd later tape something that would end their marriage. I had my own apartment, my own job I was good at, one houseplant that survived purely out of spite. But my evenings belonged to a family group chat, and that spring the chat had one subject: my sister Madison's wedding. Dress fittings. Cake tastings. A 3-day emergency over napkin colors. When Madison's French bulldog tore a ligament in his knee, the chat treated it like a heart transplant. My dad, halfway around the world on a work contract, was the only one who ever asked about me first. How's my girl? Every single call. I want you to hold on to that question, because it comes back later, in a hospital doorway, and it means something different by the time it does. That Tuesday I clocked out at 7, tired the particular way a double shift makes you tired, and texted my mom that her prescription was in my bag. I never made it home. A delivery truck ran a red light at an intersection with a long light and a short temper, and 40 miles an hour of steel met my driver's side door. I remember the sound more than the impact, a giant can opener working fast. Then ceiling tiles sliding past overhead, and a voice from my own break room saying my name like a question. They brought me to the hospital I work in. There's a specific kind of embarrassment in bleeding out in front of people you eat lunch with. By the time they wheeled me toward the operating room, my blood pressure was a suggestion, and somewhere above me a phone was already ringing at the nurse's station. I wasn't awake to hear what happened next. But I've pieced together every second of it since: 3 phone calls, 1 word, and a silence that lasted 7 days. And underneath all of it, in a junk drawer I'd helped my father dig through weeks earlier for his passport, sat 2 small laminated cards that would end up telling me the truth nobody else in my family was willing to. I just didn't know to look yet. Before I tell you what I found in that junk drawer, I need you to understand what kind of daughter I was. Because the whole story only makes sense once you see the shape of the hole I was filling. Every family has a person like me in it. Maybe you're that person. The one who remembers the doctor's appointments. The one whose number is on file everywhere, in case of emergency call. The one who shows up early and leaves late and never once gets asked if they're tired, because somewhere along the way, everyone quietly agreed that you don't get tired. You just get things done. That was me. 8 years into nursing, and I'd brought the job home without ever clocking in for it. Sundays I stocked my mother's pill organizer into its 7 little compartments, snapping each lid shut like I was closing a chart. I taped a color-coded medication calendar to her fridge so she'd never miss a dose. When she thanked me, It wasn't the way you thank your daughter. It was the way you thank a delivery driver, a nod, already looking past you at whatever came next. I told myself that was fine. I had my own life, technically. A one-bedroom walk-up I paid for myself. A career I was good at. One houseplant that had somehow survived my schedule out of pure spite. But my evenings, every one of them, belonged to a family group chat, and that spring the group chat had exactly one topic: my sister Madison's wedding. Dress fittings got their own thread. Cake tastings got a poll. There was a 3-day, all-caps crisis over whether the napkins should be ivory or eggshell. I still don't know that there's a difference. And when Madison's French bulldog, Biscuit, tore a ligament in his knee chasing a tennis ball, the chat responded like the dog had gone into cardiac arrest. Vet updates. Recovery photos. A GoFundMe nobody needed because Madison's fiancé makes more in a month than I make in 3, but sympathy isn't rational, it's just loud. My father was the only one who ever broke the pattern. What I was actually doing was auditioning. And nobody tells you the difference between the two until the day the audition ends, and nobody comes to tell you whether you got the part. That Tuesday, I clocked out at 7 after a double shift, texted my mother that her blood pressure prescription was in my bag, and pulled onto Route 9 toward Callahan, the intersection with the long light and the short temper. I had the green. I've replayed that intersection more times than I can count, and I still can't tell you if there was a sound before the impact. What I remember is a giant can opener working fast, and then ceiling tiles sliding past overhead, and then a voice from my own break room saying my name like it wasn't sure it was allowed to. The truck was making a delivery run. 40 miles an hour of steel met my driver's side door at an intersection where I had the green light, and a green light, it turns out, doesn't mean anything to a man who's already decided the red doesn't apply to him. They brought me to the emergency room where I work. There's a specific, private kind of humiliation in bleeding out in front of people you eat lunch with in the break room. I drifted in and out while the trauma team ran the alphabet over me, and the words I caught weren't the good ones. Pressure's dropping. Belly's filling. My spleen had torn open and was quietly pouring my blood supply into places it was never supposed to go. Nobody needed my permission to fix that. When you roll into a trauma bay unconscious and dying, the law assumes you'd like to live. Consent is implied. But there's a protocol for family. Someone pulls your emergency contact and makes the call, so the people who love you can get in a car and come. Mine was on file with Human Resources, same as it had been since my first day. Lorraine Rutledge. Mother. I used to think of that line on the form as a formality. A box you fill in and forget, like your middle name. I know better now. That line is a bet you place on a person years in advance, payable in full on the worst night of your life. They wheeled me toward the operating room a little after 9. My blood pressure was a suggestion at that point. Somewhere above me, at the nurse's station, a phone was already ringing. I wasn't awake for any of this. I've pieced it together since from the one person who was standing there, Nora Feeney, charge nurse, my best friend of 9 years, the woman who dialed my mother's number 3 times in a single night. The first call went out around 8:45. Nora kept her voice in that flat, clinical register we're trained to use for exactly this moment. Your daughter's been in a serious accident. She's unconscious. She's going into emergency surgery. You should come now. My mother didn't ask which hospital. She didn't ask if I was going to live. There was a pause, Nora told me, with boutique music playing behind it. And then, we're busy. Her sister needs us more right now. Then she asked to be kept posted, the way you'd track a package. The second call came from the trauma surgeon himself, before they opened me up, because the numbers were ugly and he believed families deserved the truth even when it was heavy. He got the same wall. The third call was Nora again, a little after 11, when I was out of surgery but not out of danger, pressure still sliding, more blood going and then staying put. She said the words nurses only say when we mean them completely. If there's family who wants to be here, tonight might be her last. My mother's answer, in full, keep us posted. Nora tried my sister too. Straight to voicemail. A text came back half an hour later. Madison was at the emergency vet with Biscuit, and Mom's handling it. Somewhere across town, My mother was handling it from the good chairs at a bridal boutique, and my sister was holding a French bulldog's paw. I was 31 years old, and my next of kin had put me on hold. I bring up numbers here because I looked into this later, after everything, out of the same instinct that makes a nurse chart everything even off the clock. It turns out families abandoning each other at the worst moment isn't as rare as I once needed it to be. Recent national surveys put the number of American adults who've cut off contact with a family member at over a quarter. Tens of millions of people quietly living some version of what happened to me. That didn't make it hurt less. It just told me I wasn't as alone in the wound as I was in the room. Nobody came. Not that night. Not the next. I woke up on day 3, minus a spleen, with a breathing tube fresh out of my throat and a voice like a rusted hinge, and the first thing I did, because of course I did, was my own inventory. Splenectomy. 3 broken ribs. A fractured wrist. A concussion that made the ceiling swim if I turned my head too fast. Across the hall, an elderly man had a family that had organized itself into shifts. Daughter in the morning, son at lunch, grandkids rotating through the evening like a schedule I'd built for other people's families 100 times. Nobody had built one for me. By day 7, I was cleared to leave. I wrote most of my own discharge plan because I was the easiest patient that floor ever processed, and because writing things down is how I hold my hands still when everything else in me wants to shake. Before I left, I asked for 1 sheet of paper. I'm not a dramatic person. I chart. I don't compose. But some things need to be in writing, and I'd had a week flat on my back to choose every line of it. I folded it once. I set it dead center on the pillow, where a patient's head should have been. I wasn't there for what happened next. But Nora was at the station that afternoon, and she told me every second of it. The flowers, the balloon, the staged reunion my mother needed before my father's plane touched down. And the moment she picked up that note and watched the color leave her own face, top to bottom, like someone had opened a valve. My father's plane landed at 6:40. By 7:30, there was a rental car outside Nora's building and a 62-year-old engineer standing in the doorway with his suitcase still in his hand. He looked at the splint. At the bruises going yellow at the edges. At the careful way I was propped on pillows, because broken ribs make you choose between breathing and moving. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he crossed the room, hugged me the way you'd handle blown glass, and said, "How's my girl?" And I fell apart in a way I hadn't let myself all week. He sat on the edge of Nora's fold-out couch for an hour, wanting the timeline the way engineers want data, the truck, the surgery, the 3 calls, the boutique, the vet. He flinched at the vet. I watched him take each fact and set it down carefully, like a part of a machine he was dreading having to reassemble. At some point he said, quietly, I believed her because it never crossed my mind not to. That sentence did more damage to me than the truck had, because that's the whole marriage right there in 9 words. He went home to ask my mother one question. Why did you tell me it was a fender bender? I didn't hear that conversation. I got it in pieces later. She cried at the correct volume. She explained she hadn't wanted him to abandon his contract, that the completion bonus mattered for retirement, that doctors always make things sound worse than they are. It was a good performance. With one flaw, it answered logistics, and he had asked about love. My father moved into the guest room that night. What he didn't do was leave. Decent people give the benefit of the doubt one last time. It's the tax on being decent. 6 weeks out, ribs mostly knitted, splints still on, I accepted a dinner invitation at my parents' house. I wasn't ready. I went anyway, because refusing forever isn't a plan. My mother cooked what she announced as my favorite, chicken and dumplings, which was my favorite when I was 12. I've been vegetarianish for a decade, a fact I've told her at least 10 times, a fact that requires actually looking at me to retain. The table was staged like a photo shoot. Cloth napkins. The good candlesticks. Place cards for 5 people, with mine positioned where the lighting flattered the centerpiece instead of my face. She spoke almost entirely in the future tense. We'll put this whole awful spring behind us. It'll look so wonderful to have both my girls up there at the wedding. People have been asking about you. I've told them you're thriving. My father said almost nothing the entire meal. He watched her the way he reads a blueprint he suspects has an error in it somewhere. Toward dessert, she reached across the table, squeezed my wrist, the recently fractured one, naturally, and delivered a line I'm fairly sure she'd rehearsed in a mirror. Everything I did to keep this family whole. I said nothing. I was off the clock. I let the sentence chart itself. Madison visited exactly once during those first weeks. 15 minutes, a promotional candle from her cosmetics company still wearing its free gift over $50 sticker. She scrolled her phone twice from the arm of Nora's couch and delivered her version of concern. You scared everyone, you know. And honestly, you kind of hijacked my engagement month. I want to be fair to my sister, so here's fairness. I don't think she heard how it sounded. In her weather system, she's the sun. Eclipses feel personal. She asked if I'd still be up for being a bridesmaid. Eyed the splint and wondered aloud if it'd be off before the photos, because gray isn't in the palette. Then she left for a tasting. Nora let the silence season for a moment after the door closed. She's good at that. Has she ever once, Nora asked, sat in a waiting room for you? I opened my mouth to defend the family and found the cupboard bare. Because I remembered a waiting room years earlier, Madison's appendectomy, 24 years old and terrified, and somebody had spent the whole night in a plastic chair, filled out her intake forms, translated everything the resident said, held her hand until the anesthesia took her under, and was still sitting there when she woke up. That somebody was me. 20 years old, a nursing student with an exam that Friday. It had never once occurred to me not to be there. That's not a virtue, by the way. I was starting to see it was a training program. By week 2 at Nora's, I'd reorganized her medicine cabinet, alphabetized her spices, and started laying out her vitamins next to the coffee maker every night, with a broken wrist, mind you. She came home from a shift, looked at the little cup of vitamins, and took the laundry basket out of my hands like you'd take keys from a drunk. You're auditioning again, she said. Sit down. You already have the part. It's called being my friend. I laughed, and then, embarrassingly, my eyes stung, because nobody had ever said it that plainly before. I'd been auditioning my entire life. Be useful. Be easy. Be no trouble. And maybe this family will keep you. My job just made the audition professional grade. That night I sat up with my laptop, going through old family photos my cousin had scanned years earlier. Once you see the pattern, you can't stop seeing it. Madison, front and center, my mother's arms wrapped around her like a seatbelt. My father off to one side, hand on my shoulder. And me edge of frame, half-cropped, sometimes missing entirely, because I was usually the one holding the camera. 31 years of composition. I kept asking those photos the same question I'd been asking the ceiling all week. What did I do wrong? It was the wrong question. The right one was sitting in my father's junk drawer, printed on 2 small laminated cards, waiting for me to be ready to see it. I found the cards by accident, the way you find most things that end up matching. My father had asked me to grab his reading glasses off the desk in his study while I was leaving that dinner. The junk drawer was open an inch, rubber bands, his passport, a fistful of church blood drive pins going back 20 years. And on top, 2 laminated donor cards, side by side. David Rutledge. Type O negative. Lorraine Rutledge. Type A positive. I stood there holding his glasses, staring at 2 pieces of laminated cardstock a good deal longer than a person needs to stare at stationery. Something in the back of my head had started to itch. That night I couldn't sleep, which I blamed on the ribs. That was a lie. I lay on Nora's fold-out running numbers, because that's what my brain does at 2 in the morning, it charts. My own blood type is a negative. I've known that since I was old enough to donate. 6 weeks earlier, 2 units of it had gone back into my arm with my own name on the paperwork. Fine. Oh, an A can make an A-negative daughter. Textbook genetics, nothing strange about it. Then, unbidden, at 2:17 in the morning, came Madison. Her appendectomy at Mercy West, years back. I remembered the pre-op nurse reading her chart aloud while I held her hand. AB positive. I remembered it precisely because Madison had turned it into a party fact she repeated for years afterward. Universal recipient. My blood takes from everybody. Very on brand. The room got very quiet. Here's the thing every nursing student learns in week 1 of pathophysiology. 2 parents with type O and type A can only produce a child who's type O or type A. That's the entire menu. They cannot, not rarely, not unusually, cannot produce a child who's type AB. The B has to come from somewhere. And there is no B anywhere in David and Lorraine Rutledge. I got up, ribs complaining, and found the pad of yellow sticky notes Nora keeps by the phone. I wrote it out the way you'd write an order that needs a second signature before anyone will act on it. O plus A is not equal to AB. I stuck it on the fridge and stood in the kitchen light, staring at 4 characters and a math symbol that were quietly taking my family apart. Then I did what you do with a shocking lab value. You look for the error. A transcription mistake. A mixed-up chart. Some 1 in a million phenotype. I verified it the way I'd verify a medication order that looked wrong. Independent sources, no assumptions, and absolutely no snooping in anyone's medical records, because I like my nursing license and I know exactly where the legal lines sit. My own type was easy. It's in my own patient portal, mine to read, along with the transfusion record from the accident. A negative confirmed. My father confirmed his without ever knowing there was a question. I called to ask how his week was going and steered the conversation toward the church blood drive, which takes about 1 sentence with him. He was off and running in seconds. Universal donor, O negative, rarest of the common types. They call me first when supplies run low. He sounded so pleased. I sat there with my eyes shut, listening to my sweet, oblivious father hand me the evidence himself. My mother's card I'd now seen twice with my own eyes, sitting in a drawer she'd never think twice about, on top of years of donor pins from those same church drives. And Madison's, I didn't need paper for that one. I'd heard it read off her chart in pre-op, and heard her repeat it at brunches and bachelorette weekends for a decade. Universal recipient. It's very on brand. She was right, actually. My father's blood gives to anybody. My sister's blood takes from everybody. Biology, it turns out, has a sense of humor. I sat at Nora's kitchen table and drew the 4 types in a square, parents on top, daughters underneath, the way you'd sketch it out for a genetics quiz. Me, possible. Madison, impossible. There was no version of this family in which my sister was my father's daughter. 31 years of, your sister needs us more. And it turned out the sentence had a genotype. I want to be honest about what that night actually felt like, because it wasn't triumph. I made it to the bathroom and lost my dinner, and only some of that was the pain medication. If the math was right, my father had spent 35 years building a life on a set of blueprints that had been forged before he ever picked up a pencil. And every scene of my childhood reshot itself in a new light while I sat on the bathroom floor, my mother at Madison's recital with a camcorder, and checking her watch at my nursing pinning ceremony. The way she'd fought for Madison's spot on the cheer squad and forgotten the date of my boards. I used to run those old memories looking for my mistake. Some flaw in me that explained the difference in temperature. There was never a flaw. There was a code. And I'd just learned how to read it. A blood type only tells you what's impossible, though. It doesn't tell you who, or when, or whether my father had ever suspected, or how a lie that size gets serviced quietly for 35 years in a town this small. For that, you don't need a lab. You need the person who remembers every wedding and every name that got quietly swallowed along the way. I texted my Aunt Carol, my father's sister, keeper of the old photo boxes, teller of careful truths, and asked if I could come by. Her reply landed in under a minute. I wondered when you'd come. Aunt Carol's kitchen smells like percolator coffee and lemon oil, and it is where this family keeps the truth it never displays anywhere else. She poured 2 cups, sat down across from me, folded her hands, and said one word. Ask. So I asked about 1990. It came out of her like something long rehearsed and never once performed. My mother was 23, working the counter at her father's hardware store, And in love, the real kind, Carol said, the kind you can spot across a parking lot with a smiling car salesman named Frank Delaney. Everyone assumed a ring was coming. What came instead was Frank marrying the only daughter of a man who owned dealerships up the interstate. He did the math, and he married the inventory. He was gone by June. 2 months later, my mother was suddenly, urgently engaged to David Rutledge, the quiet young engineer from St. Monica's who'd been carrying a torch for her since high school and couldn't believe his luck. They married that fall, in a hurry everyone politely called romance. Madison arrived the following spring. 5 weeks early, according to the birth announcement. Carol paused over her coffee. Biggest preemie the nursery had ever seen. Your mother said that out loud once, at the christening, and never got invited to another one. Then Frank's wife passed away, in 2006, no children of their own, and Frank Delaney came home and bought the local dealership, the one with the flags out front on the highway. Carol looked into her cup for a long moment before she said the rest. About 15 years ago, she'd stopped at a rest area on Route 9 and seen her sister-in-law's scarf hanging in the passenger seat of a car parked outside Delaney Motors, and her sister-in-law laughing beside him. She'd told herself it wasn't her circus. She'd been telling herself that ever since. I owed you this story sooner, she said, and slid a shoebox of old photographs across the table. There's one in here your mother begged me to burn. I didn't. My mother has gone to book club every Thursday evening for as long as I can remember. 20 years of Thursdays. I have never once seen her carry a book. The following Thursday, Nora drove. I wasn't cleared for long drives yet, and we rolled slowly past the condominiums on the east shore of Mercer Lake, where, according to Carol, Frank Delaney had lived since he came back to town. I told myself we were just eliminating a possibility. Nurses, double check. There it was. Third space from the entrance, under a security light that might as well have been a spotlight. My mother's champagne-colored sedan, the one with the parish parking sticker and the dealer frame from Delaney Motors I'd never once thought to notice. Up in a second-floor window, a lamp, and 2 silhouettes against the curtain, one of them tipping her head back the way my mother laughs when she wants a man to think she finds him funny. I did not take a picture. I want that on the record. Whatever I am not a woman who builds a file on her own mother. I'd seen where that road goes, and I wanted no part of it. I sat in the passenger seat for 10 quiet minutes, watching a lamp burn in a window, letting 20 years of Thursdays reorganize themselves into what they had always been. Then I said, okay, drive. I didn't need evidence anymore. I needed to stop hoping I was wrong. What I hadn't expected, what nobody warns you about, is how much that kind of certainty costs, even when it's the truth you went looking for. I read afterward that people who uncover this sort of family secret often carry real, measurable weight from it, more anxiety, more depression, a grief with no funeral attached to it. Nobody had died. But something had, some version of my family I'd been quietly grieving for years without knowing what to call it. My mother's next move wasn't an apology. It was a checkbook. The summons came sweetly, the way it always did. A text with a heart emoji. Sunday dinner, just us girls. As if the last one had gone so well. I went, because by then I'd started doing something I'd never done in that house before, observing instead of performing. It's remarkable what you notice once you stop trying to be seen. She'd made lemon chicken and talked wedding logistics for half an hour. Flowers. The head table. Whether the DJ could be trusted with the father-daughter dance. Then, with the studied casualness of a woman merging onto a highway, she got to the point. I hear you visited your Aunt Carol. I said I had. She's getting older, you know. She embellishes. Half her stories are other people's stories with the names moved around. I'd hate for you to take some tale of hers to heart. I gave her the face I use for patients who insist they definitely haven't been skipping their medication. Pleasant. Neutral. Unpersuaded. She made good tea, I said. My mother studied me across the tablecloth for 3 long seconds, and I watched something cross her face I'd genuinely never seen there before. Uncertainty. She changed the subject to centerpieces, but all through dessert her thumb kept finding her wedding ring and turning it, slowly, like a lock she was checking. She hadn't asked what Carol told me. She'd asked whether I believed it. Those are two different questions, and only one of them belongs to an innocent woman. 2 days later, at 4 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang at Nora's apartment. My mother stood on the step, alone, lipstick perfect, holding a plain white envelope. I knew before she opened her mouth that it wasn't a card. She came in, declined coffee, sat on the edge of Nora's armchair like it might wrinkle if she leaned back, and slid the envelope across the coffee table with 2 fingers. Inside was a check for $20,000. Her voice went soft and maternal, a register I hadn't heard aimed at me since I had a fever in 4th grade. Mom knows this year has been too much for you. The accident, the stress, this is for a new car, and whatever the insurance didn't cover. We want you whole again, sweetheart. Healed before the wedding. $20,000 is a real number. A whole car. Months of copays, a chunk of a deductible. She watched me look at it, and then she added the sentence she'd actually come to deliver. And all this ancient history people are suddenly so interested in, my life before your father, my old friendships, that's grown woman business, Casey. Family peace is worth more than gossip. I need my girls beside me these next few weeks. Both of them. Smiling. There it was. Nobody in that room had said the name Frank Delaney. Nobody had mentioned Thursdays, or blood, or 1990. I hadn't accused her of a single thing. And here she was, negotiating terms. You don't pay hush money for a rumor you believe is false. You pay it for one you know is true. I understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, exactly what I was holding. An invoice with my name on it. A price tag for the same silence I'd been providing for free for 31 years. She hadn't come to convince me of anything. She'd come to formalize the arrangement. I set my water glass down, picked up the check, squared its edges the way you'd square a form before filing it, and slid it back across the table, face down. Her eyes followed it the whole way. I read monitors for a living, Mom, I said. Quiet voice. The one I use to deliver a handoff report. I know when the numbers are lying. And I know a payment when I see one. She started to speak, and I didn't raise my voice even one notch, because I'd learned exactly how that's done from her from 3 phone calls, delivered calm, devastating anyway. For 31 years I've been applying for a position in this family. I brought coffee to the interview. I did the job for free nights and weekends. And every year the posting went to Madison. I finally know why. And it was never going to be me, no matter what I did. I nudged the check another inch toward her. So thank you for the offer. I'm done applying. What happened to her face then is hard to describe if you've never watched a mask actually come off. The maternal softness didn't fade, it shut off, like a screen losing power. What sat across from me was a stranger I'd known my entire life. Your father is a happy man, she said, very low, very precise. 35 years. A good home. A daughter getting married. If you take that away from him, Asia, my full name, the one she pulls out like a blade, you won't be a hero. You'll just be the one who destroyed this family. Think about who they'll blame. Think hard. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and let herself out with her spine perfectly straight, complimenting Nora's begonias on the way down the steps like nothing had happened at all. The check stayed on the table, face down, one corner lifting in the breeze from the closing door. Nora set down her grocery bags and looked at me. So, she said, what monitor do we watch now? And the honest answer was, my father's. That night I finally went through Aunt Carol's shoebox, all the way to the bottom. In an envelope with softened corners, I found the photograph my mother had begged her to burn. October, 1990. The bridal room at St. Monica's. My mother, 23 years old, in her wedding dress, being fussed over by 2 aunts, and she's crying. Not happy tears. You can tell even in a faded print. Her eyes are swollen and aimed at the middle distance, and standing behind her is my grandmother, mouth set like a staple, hands clamped on the bride's shoulders in a way that isn't affection. Carol had told me what her own mother reported hearing from the doorway that morning. Wipe your face. He's a good provider. That was the pep talk. That was the entire sermon on love, from a mother of that generation to a pregnant 23-year-old whose man had just married a dealership. I sat with that photo a long time. I'm not going to tell you I forgave her, because I didn't, and I still don't know if I will. But for one night, I could see the machine that had built her. A young woman handed exactly one exit, told a ring was a roof, that appearances were oxygen, that you married the reliable man and kept the rest in a drawer. She took the exit. Then she spent 35 years making everyone else pay the toll for it. I was the daughter of the marriage, I told Nora. Madison was the daughter of the love story. My mother kept the love story and built the marriage on top of it, and never once let the two touch until I made them. What I hadn't decided, the thing I circled for days, was my father. And the following week, he decided it for me, without knowing it. It was a Saturday, my parents' backyard, a month before the wedding. My dad at the grill in the apron Madison bought him years ago, world's okayest chef, flipping burgers while Madison, barefoot in the grass, made him practice the father-daughter dance off a phone speaker. He counted his steps out loud and apologized to her feet when he missed one, and she laughed, head back, and he glowed like the coals. I stood at the picnic table holding a bowl of potato salad, watching the happiest man I know dance on a floor that I alone could see wasn't there. That night on Nora's couch, I laid out both roads, out loud. Tell him, and I detonate the family, the wedding, his 35 years, maybe his health, and hand my mother the exact story she'd already drafted, where I'm the bitter daughter who burned it all down. Or stay quiet, and he stays happy. Isn't that mercy? Nora listened all the way through. Then she asked one question, in the tone she uses for teaching new grads. On your floor, does a patient have the right to their own diagnosis? Even the bad ones? Even when the family says don't tell him, it'll only upset him. Yes, I said. Obviously yes. It's his body. His life. His choice. She nodded, slow. Then explain to me why your father is the exception. I was still sitting with that when my phone buzzed. A text from my dad. Fishing Saturday. Mercer Lake. Sunrise. Just my girl and me. Mercer Lake at sunrise is the kind of quiet that has texture. Miss standing on the water like it pays rent. Dock boards ticking as they warm. My dad backed the truck in, handed me a thermos, set up 2 folding chairs with the unhurried ceremony he brings to anything that matters. For a while we just fished, which in our family means drinking coffee and watching a bobber do absolutely nothing. Then he reeled in slow, set the rod across his knees, and looked at me the way he looks at a machine making a sound only he can hear. Casey, he said, you've been carrying something since the hospital. You carried it at dinner. You're carrying it right now. And it's bending you. He turned his chair to face mine. Set it down. So I did. All of it. Plain words, short sentences, nearest truth first, the way I'd been trained to deliver news that splits a life into before and after. I told him the fender bender story wasn't a mix-up, that my mother had known the first night, taken 3 calls, been told I might not live, and gone dress shopping instead. I told him about the blood types, his O negative, hers a positive, mine a negative, all fitting, and then Madison's AB positive, which fits nowhere at all. I watched him run the problem the way an engineer runs any problem, hunting for the loophole. O gives O. A gives A or O. There is no B anywhere in this family, and there's no version of that math where Madison is his. Then I gave him the rest in order. 1990, a car salesman named Frank Delaney. A wedding arranged in 2 months. A baby announced 5 weeks early who was the biggest preemie the nursery had ever seen. Frank widowed, back in town since 2006. 20 years of Thursdays. A car parked at Mercer Lake under a lamp I hadn't needed to photograph. I'm not asking you to believe me, I said. Ask me anything. Check everything. I'll sit here as long as it takes. Then I did the only other thing I know how to do at a bedside. I put my hand over his and I stayed. He was quiet for the longest 20 minutes of my life. Denial first, your mother wouldn't, collapsing under its own weight before he even finished the sentence, because he'd already watched her lie to him about my surgery with a straight face. Then the engineering, muttered at the water. O gives O. A gives A or O, checking his own math, hunting for the loophole one more time. There is no loophole. I watched the exact moment he accepted it because his shoulders moved the way shoulders move when something heavy gets set onto them for keeps. How long have you known? He finally asked. I told him. Weeks. And why I'd waited, the wedding, his heart, the story my mother already had loaded and ready, where I'm the one who burns it all down. Why tell me now, he said quietly, when it would have been easier forever not to. The answer came from somewhere older than the accident. Because I spent 31 years trying to be useful enough to be loved, Dad. I almost died still auditioning. I'm done. You deserved a marriage, not a maintenance contract. And I deserve to be somebody's daughter, not the family's nurse. My father looked at me for a long moment. And then my father cried, the way men cry who were never taught how. Briefly. Furiously. Like weather. When it passed, he picked his rod back up, cast it out, and told me his decision with the water carrying his voice. I raised Madison. Taught her to drive. Sat up with her when she had croup. 35 years. That part of my life was never a lie. She was never the lie. Cast drift. Your mother was. He would walk Madison down the aisle, he said, because a father is the man who shows up, and he had 35 years of showing up that no blood test could repossess. And on the Monday after the wedding, he was going to see a lawyer. He looked at me once more, and what he said next I'll keep for the rest of my life. You're the only one who told me the truth in my own house. That makes you the easy part of this, Casey. You were always the easy part. I wasn't there for what happened that night. That was by design, his design, and mine. He told me the rest later, in pieces, with the flat calm of a man reading back a flight recorder. He came home, set his keys on the counter, and said one sentence. Tell me about Thursdays, Lorraine. No folder. No accusations. Just a schedule. She tried the stations in order. Surprise. Offense. Tears. And then, when none of it caught, negotiation, because negotiation is where she'd always lived. And that's where she made the mistake 35 years of managing everyone had quietly taught her to make. She reached for one of her handler's tools, in front of a man who'd stopped being handled. She picked up her phone and called Frank Delaney on speaker to prove it was nothing. Frank will tell you himself. Tell him it's nothing. Frank answered on the second ring, my father said, in a voice he'd hear forever. Low. Comfortable. A voice with its shoes off. Hey, you. Silence. David is standing here, my mother said. Brittle now. Tell him about us. Tell him it's and Frank Delaney, presented for the second time in his life with a choice between my mother and his own comfort, chose exactly what he'd chosen in 1990. Whoa, whoa. Don't drag me into your marriage, Lorraine. I have a family. Click. Dial tone in a quiet kitchen. My father said he almost felt sorry for her then, watching her hold that phone. Almost. He slept in the guest room that night, and this time he locked the door. 2 weeks later, Madison's wedding went off flawlessly. White runner, string quartet, for 100 roses. My father walked her down the aisle with his back straight and his eyes wet, and everyone in that church thought it was sentiment. Only 3 people knew it was also a goodbye. My mother wore the smile from the old photographs, layered a little thicker than usual. I sat in the back row, and for the last time in my life, I was no trouble at all. Monday morning, 9 o'clock, his lawyer filed. Here's what 6 months of consequences look like when nobody screams. The house sold in the divorce. Half of a house isn't a house. My mother moved into a 2-bedroom apartment next to the laundromat on 5th, where the dryers thump through the wall like a They simply stopped calling her to chair things, which, in that world, is exile. And Madison. My father told her the truth himself, gently, after the honeymoon, because he refused to let her hear it from the town first. She called me before he'd even finished telling her. Incandescent. I knew before my wedding. You let me walk down the aisle on a lie. Who do you think you are? Then she went quiet for months. And her silence spread to cover our mother too, which I hadn't expected. Madison had been raised her whole life to follow the picture. And there was no picture left over there anymore. Just an apartment by a laundromat and a story nobody wanted in the album. No thunderbolts. No courtroom scene. Just invoices, 35 years of them, finally mailed to the correct address. My father bought a small blue house 2 streets up from Mercer Lake, close enough to walk his coffee down to the water. Sundays are pancakes now. He cooks. I sit at the counter and let him, which for me is the harder skill. Some weeks I still reach for the spatula, and he points it at me like a teacher with a ruler. I took a job at an outpatient clinic. 8-hour shifts, no nights. My license and my boundaries, both intact. I still drive through the intersection on Route 9 most days. The light is usually green now, same as it was the day of the crash. I still count to 3 before I roll through it. In the spring, a text came from a number I hadn't seen in months. I did a blood test. Thank you for not telling me before the wedding. I typed and deleted a dozen replies. All the fixes. All the old instincts to nurse it back to normal. Then I sent back the only thing that was true and mine. Whenever you're ready, I'll show up. I've read since that this happens more often than people think, that most estranged families don't stay that way forever, that the majority eventually find their way back to something, even after the worst of it. I don't know yet if Madison and I will be one of those stories. But I know I'm no longer the one keeping the door locked. Almost a year after the accident, I went back to St. Bridget as a patient one more time, a scheduled repair of a small hernia at my surgical scar. Routine day surgery. But routine still comes with paperwork, and paperwork still has that one line. Emergency contact. I'd filled in the same name on that line since I was 18 years old, the way you recite something you memorized long before you understood what it meant. This time, I printed in block letters a pharmacist could love. David Rutledge. Father. When I surfaced in recovery, groggy and stupid in a paper gown, there was a man asleep sitting up in the world's least comfortable chair, a fishing magazine open on his chest. On the little table beside him, a bunch of daisies from the gas station on Route 9, the price sticker still stuck to the cellophane. Nobody had called him with bad news that morning. There was no crisis. No surgeon. No, tonight might be her last. Nobody had needed him there. He came anyway. I lay there letting the monitor count my heartbeat for me, watching him sleep in a chair too small for him, and I finally understood the whole difference between blood and family. One is a type. It sits on a laminated card in a junk drawer and tells you what's possible. The other one shows up in a plastic chair at 7 in the morning with gas station flowers, for no reason anybody would call an emergency. If I've learned one thing worth handing to you, it's this: family was never the people who match your blood. It's the people who show up before you're even awake. And you are completely, entirely allowed to stop auditioning for the ones who don't. I spent 31 years keeping a calendar for a family that couldn't remember I don't eat meat. I spent 1 week in a hospital bed learning who actually reads the chart. And I spent one sunrise at Mercer Lake finding out that telling the truth, even when it costs you everything staged and pretty, is still cheaper than 35 more years of silence. My mother taught me what a family looks like when it's built to be seen. My father taught me what one looks like when nobody's watching. I know which one I'm keeping. If you've ever been the one who always shows up, the one who remembers the pills, the appointments, the birthdays nobody else can find on a calendar, this is your sign. Keep showing up. Just save it for the people who would do the same for you.